So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War and to another battle replay. And it's been a while since I've done Silmarillion. One of the things that has annoyed me most about my very congested schedule and how it's interrupted really with my ability to record is the fact that I have missed a rather significant moment in the development of Silmarillion Total War because a whole new faction has been added to the game for people to play on the test build at the moment, and it's a big one as well because it is the Blessed Realm of Valinor. Pretty substantial faction, I'm sure you would agree, and we'll go into the ins and outs of what they're all about as we go through the army compositions, but we are going to be seeing 3 armies of the Blessed Realm on the defence today against a plethora of their kin from the mainland. I believe it's going to be a bunch of the elven kingdoms that we have already seen in Silmarillion that are going to be trying to engage in that old elven hobby, it seems, of kinslaying. But that's kind of an unavoidable theme that we have going on with a lot of Silmarillion battles, because there are 3 evil factions in the game. They're greatly outnumbered by the number of good factions that there are, as there should be, given what the lore is what it is, but it also means that many of the battles they end up having a kinslaying theme to it, and probably the most heinous kinslaying of them all, really, when you consider that this is Valinor themselves that all these elves are going to be marching upon. This is also a new map, which was made by Carmul, Lord of the Easterlings, and it is intended to be the map which will represent Vinyamar, so a very nice siege battle indeed, which is going to be, again, that wedding cake style of siege, it seems, with large layers at the bottom ending in this layer at the top here. And it's a pretty substantial map as well, and as you would expect, it is a rather long battle indeed as well, 48,000 frames. Really glad to be doing this as my first return to Silmarillion for a while, but yeah, I really was kind of annoyed that I missed out on the first foray into this faction, because J-Monster did ask me to do it, but I was just unable to really react in as quick a manner as I wanted, so hopefully I can begin to make that up now. But yes, Valinor. It is worth saying as well that if you do want to just skip ahead to the battle, then please feel free. There will be a timestamp in the description below, but I would imagine that we're going to spend a little bit more time on the army composition phase this time, just because it is a whole new faction that I need to talk about. So we'll probably spend a little bit more time, certainly on the defenders anyway. So I think we will start off with them. We're going to break from tradition a little bit and start with the defenders rather than the attackers, because it is the new faction after all. Probably not going to go for this army first though, even if it is Carmul's himself, because his army is all in one big cluster. We will instead move over here to the middle. Now, the basic idea behind Valinor is, of course, their elite units are going to be very strong. They're split into 3 distinct kindred, I believe that is the term, and it is the Vanyar, the Noldor remnants led by King Fingolfin, and the Teleri, the coast dwellers. Now, the first 2 of those are going to make up the really elite, heavy core, essentially, melee core that Valinor have. All of them are going to be melee units. I think there was a minor patch that came out between this replay being sent to me and now, so I think the 2 Maiar bodyguard units have now been added, but we won't be seeing them today. I think there is also a few visual tweaks that are not going to be present in this battle as well, but most of Valinor is going to be on the field today. The Teleri represent certainly they're not as much warriors as the other 2 forms of kindred that Valinor are made up of, but they do offer the only ranged options that are in this faction, which are a very important aspect of them, of course. And also they are going to be the more numerous supporting units, which are of course important if you want to build a balanced army, which is very important in Silmarillion in particular. So, let's have a little look here at Captain Gervais's army. We have the Sentries of Alqualonde, so they are of course archers. Teleri as well are going to be the lightest units that you can field. They are the most numerous, certainly given the fact that when we move on to the other 2 forms of kindred, there is a very significant factor involved with them. But yeah, so the Sentries of Alqualonde are going to be your archer if you're going to be playing as Valinor. They're going to obviously have an important role to play in a defensive siege such as this, because as ridiculously strong really as Valinor have the potential to be in melee in this sort of situation, it's going to be difficult for them to totally outlast all of their brethren from Middle-earth if they intend to just go at them hammer and tongs in melee. They're going to need a little bit of support from range, and that is exactly what the Sentries of Alqualonde can offer you. Now then, some of the Vanyar, the peacekeepers of Valimar. Now, all of the Vanyar and the Noldor units are multiple HP at the moment. Now, that is a big deal in Silmarillion in particular, because multiple HP is intended to only really consist of the best, so many other factions only have 2 to 3 options that have this in melee. Valinor, I believe, have 6, which is possibly more now that the 2 Maiar units have been added as well. So this means that while your armies may very well be quite small with regards to the heavier units you have in melee, the individual power of your units is obviously going to be very, very substantial. And if you can make the battlefield small, as you can do in a defensive siege, this can make life very difficult for the attackers. And I believe as well the Noldor are slightly bulkier, whereas the Vanyar have got armour piercing to their name. J-Monster himself, I would push you towards his Valinor faction reveal, because it is 2 hours long and all of the information will be dealt with in far greater detail there than it will be here. We only have so many hours in the day after all, and this is a rather large battle in and of itself. But the Vanyar, dubbed the Seraphim by himself in that video. The Peacekeepers are of course a spear unit as well, so very good on the defence, and adding armour piercing into that. We've seen how effective armour piercing spears can be in the past, just for their holding power, and adding that bit of venom that they have on the attack as well can make them really invaluable in a situation such as this. So it's not too surprising to see Captain Gervais go so heavily in for that unit. We've also got more sentries of Alqualonde, so again, going to be a little bit more ranged options for them. Lighter armour as well, though. It is worth saying that the Vanyar don't have the heaviest armour in the game. The Noldor, I believe, are what the Blessed Realm of Valinor rely on for that sort of thing. We have the Shoal Runners of Alqualonde, so of course the Teleri are the coast dwellers. They don't go into the heart of Valinor proper, as it were. And you can see here that almost mythical looking, these horses with the horns and the greenery that is adorning them. Horse archers, it'll be interesting to see how horse archers, particularly lighter horse archers, such as this, are going to be used on this battle, but it does offer another ranged option, which of course at the really high end Valinor do slightly lack. They more than make up for that in the sheer power of their heavy infantry units, and I would suggest that they beat out even the mighty Gondolin in that regard. Now, over here we have the Shoal Hunters of Alqualonde. You can see there that they have a shield, but also they've got that sling in their hand. So no longer do the Scouts of the Tree, also from Gondolin, have this weapon all to themselves anymore. The Blessed Realm of Valinor will also have it. So if you've seen Gondolin in the past in either of my videos or anyone else's, you get the idea of how these guys are going to work. The base damage of them isn't too great, but it is armour piercing damage, and it is surprisingly vicious if you can use them effectively. Now back over here we have the Sentinels of Tirion, so here you can see a bit of that Noldor goodness in action. Really nice looking swords on these guys as well, very, very strong. Interestingly enough, they're not actually a bodyguard unit. It's kind of difficult to differentiate the bodyguard units from the non-bodyguard units in Valinor, because so many of them could classify as that in other factions. But this is of course a good heavy swordsman unit. Again, they may be small, but what they lack in numbers they more than make up for in quality, which really is the big selling point of Valinor's higher tier infantry. More so perhaps than any other elven faction we've seen from any of these Lord of the Rings submods so far. Peacekeepers of Valinor, another unit of them, so he's really gone heavily in for them, but it makes a lot of sense. They should be really, really effective in this kind of battle. More Sentinels of Tirion, we have yet more of the Shoal Hunters of Alqualonde, seen quite a lot of the Teleri actually in his army, so going for a few more of the supporting units surrounding these really, really strong infantry units. This of course is the two-handed variant of the Valimar units, the Plaza Gardens of Valimar. And again, they're going to be really, really good if you can get them into that really engaged frontline fight. The downside they have, of course, is they only have medium armour really, and they are unshielded, so if they do get focused down by missile fire, that could be a problem for them. As ridiculously powerful as they could be in melee, they do have that very clear weakness, which is what the attackers should be looking to exploit if they hope to win today. We've got the Grieving Sons, which this is another Teleri unit, so they're a little bit bigger, again another heavy sword unit, so they may not be as powerful as the Sentinels of Tirion just in front of them, but it does offer them a little bit more damage on that front line, which could be key. After all, none of the attacking factions are any pushovers either, so they're going to need all of their power in this sort of situation, Valinor, to come out on top. More of the Sentries of Alqualonde. We have a catapult up here, which has got the Hearthguard of Tirion as its crew, which is the sword and board unit version of the heavy swordsman that we've already seen up till this point. And yeah, actually no, we've got a Grey Ghost 14, so we'll move on to his army now. We may as well, after all. We see more of the Plaza Guardians there. again, a must bring in this sort of situation. Really, more of the Grieving Sons, really liking a lot of these unit models, and a lot of the names are really cool as well. The Shoal Hunters of Alqualonde. Here we have the Hearthguard of Tyrion, so this of course is the sword and board version of the heavy swordsman we've already seen, albeit this one without the catapult to slow them down. And here we have the Kinsmen of Ingwe, which this is the only bodyguard unit that in this version of the game, the Blessed Realm of Valinor could choose from. As I said, there are 2 Maiar units which I believe have been added, or if they haven't been added, they will be very soon. And essentially the idea behind the 2 Maiar units is they're going to be the extremes, I believe, of what a bodyguard unit can be, one being very defensive, one being very aggressive and anti-monster. And the Kinsmen of Ingwe sit quite comfortably in the middle as just a really, really strong sword and board bodyguard unit. And he's gone for 2, so we might be doubling up on the, not on the General's bodyguard version. I believe here you can see one of the Maiar himself, who I think has golden eyes. I'm not sure if you can see them from this angle, but it's, again, just those little details that many people will never see are what make games and mod projects like this so interesting. More Sentinels of Tyrion. So I'm really interested to see how all of this really elite stuff for Valinor performs, because it's going to need to perform really well considering the scale of the opposition that lies before them, hoping for a bit of kinslaying action. Some Shoal Hunters of Alqualonde. We have a Ballista, which again with Hearthguard of Tyrion, it's really worth bringing artillery in this sort of situation, given the fact that the crew themselves are also so strong. Now, it is a half-strength unit. It is a half-strength version of a unit which is already very small, but even so, you get a Ballista and then really good heavy infantry to boot. More Plaza Guardians, some Swan Guard of Alqualonde, which is the spear version of the Teleri. This, I suppose, is the closest thing Valinor have to an entry-level militia unit, because they're just sort of basic, lighter spears. The Teleri, of course, are not quite as brutally impressive when you compare them to their kin that live further inland, but even so, I would imagine that the Swan Guard can still do just fine for themselves, but they'll do even better with the support of their heavier brethren, and then some sentries of Alqualonde on the front after laying down some stakes. And finally, to Kamul's army, he's going to be moving up into a defensive position pretty quickly. His army is going to be easier to go through, given that it's all bunched up. Sentries of Tyrion, some more Shoal Hunters, so plenty of the Teleri. I like the fact that we're already seeing that these players are not going all in for just the heavy infantry. They do see the wisdom in bringing all of the Teleri to back them up. And that's going to be an important factor, I think, going into this battle. You're going to need that ranged support. You're going to need those numbers as well to keep your front lines strong in and around all of these Peacekeepers of Valimar. We've got more of the Grieving Sons. We've got more Swan Guard of Alqualonde, Peacekeepers of Valimar, Shoal Hunters, and yeah, quite a few Teleri actually. So yeah, interesting indeed. And then more Kinsmen of Ingwe down here as well. Now then, let's move on to the attackers. We're going to try and go through this a little bit more quickly because we've already seen all of these armies in some capacity before, starting off with Tundra's Fox playing as the Elves of Ossiriand. They'll be hoping to use their ranged damage to their advantage, of course, with only the Teleri being able to return fire onto them, and they won't be able to do so to quite the same standard, I don't believe, either. So if they can really lay down a hurting, particularly on the Vanyar, I think the attackers will be quite pleased with that. A couple of units of Earthen End Tower. That armour piercing will also be really useful against the better units that Valinor will have. Even a unit this strong, however, is going to look and be pretty daunted by the level of opposition that they're up against unless they're supported. But it is among the best that Ossiriand have to offer in melee as well as at range. Not too surprising to see Ossiriand go so heavily in for their archers in this sort of situation, with plenty of skirmishers of Rathloriel as well. Just in behind all of the brown armour. And then over here some Mythern and Tol Galen, again the other heavy hitter really for Ossiriand in melee. Just goes to show as well the differences in focus between the factions here. Ossiriand, the Mythern and Tol Galen, pretty much their strongest and tankiest bodyguard unit is not multiple HP, whereas Valinor have got several units that they can choose from for just such a thing. They are armour piercing, however, which will be useful again against those really strong Valinor infantry units. Hunters of Rathloriel, javelins could be another way in which the attackers lay down a bit of a marker against the defenders here. Moving on to the Elves of Falas, the Falathrim played by Wally Wolf, something like the Nobles of Balar here, are going to be really important ultimately to try and ensure that you don't get bullied by the Vanyar when they're in formation. This is one of those units which can at least contest that. Again, they will still lose. We've seen on several occasions how strong the Nobles of Balar can be, but they are going to be outgunned in a straight-up fight here. They're going to have to rely, weirdly, all of these Elven kingdoms on numbers for once. They'll get a little bit of a taste of what it must be like to be the Orcs, I suppose. Spear Host of Brithombar, again, those javelins, could they be important? Certainly for the Falathrim, they will hope they can be decisive. Marines of Eglarest, Aran Kialim, another example of really heavy Noldor infantry, which under normal circumstances would be among one of the strongest units on the field. But on this occasion, they are going to struggle a little bit against that defensive position that Valinor will have. Marines of Brithombar, we have the really tanky Orion Ephedun, very strong heavy spear unit, which interestingly enough Valinor don't have an equivalent to. Maybe one of the Maiar units is a spear unit, I'm not entirely certain. I know that one of them is intended to be anti-monster. Warriors of Eglarest here, and then on the front line we have some marksmen of Baelor, so again hoping to skirmish with the enemy perhaps with a heavier unit of Noldor archers. Now then, skipping overhead, yeah, we've already seen those units, they're just stretched out. Going through the middle, right up the pipe, we are going to have the Elves of Ossiriand once again, this time from Melkon. Spear Host of Gelion, a very light spear unit, so they're going to be just a supporting unit once again. They need to be careful they don't get shot up too badly by the skirmishers that are going to be on the defence. Interestingly enough, actually, we're going to move on to Fingolfin if we continue to go that way. He's got some Hunters of Rathloriel in behind, he's got some Earth in End Tower again, really a must bring, and a Ballista, which are manned in here as well by, I believe, I mean they're modelled like the Mythen and Tolgalen, but I would assume they're going to have stats similar to the Kinsmen of Denethor perhaps? Heavier Ossiriand spears, which is kind of interesting. Most of his army is going to be hiding, of course, given that that is what they traffic in, but they're not going to be able to use that to their advantage fully when they're on the attack like this. They have to move forward. Now we have Y2K86 playing as Fingolfin, one of the most well-rounded factions in Silmarillion. They have strengths just about everywhere. They have got some Herdsmen of Dor-Lomin that are going to be moving forward up front. Interesting to see. I would assume the idea here is that they're going to be coming to the Undying Lands to try and besiege Valinor. So these are humans that are stepping foot. We know how well that went for our Pharazôn. I don't think it's going to go any better for the Herdsmen of Dor-Lomin if they're going to be committed in amongst the first ranks. We've got some Armatar of Barad Aithel in behind to try and offer a little bit of support, some Bladesmen of Barad Aithel as well. Herdsmen of Hithlum just in behind, so yeah, more humans again. That armour piercing will be handy, but they're going to need some serious support if they're going to be able to stay alive long enough to lay it down. Marines of Vinyamar for more javelin support. Pikes could be an interesting one. The Plaza Guardians are not pikemen after all, so the sentries of Hithlum could outrange them. This is one of the ways in which the attackers could try to seize an advantage on the front line, but if they commit this unit too quickly, they're just going to get shot up by all of the Teleri that are lying in wait upon the cliffs. Blade Masters of Barad Aithel, some Herumatar of Barad Aithel, which are of course the more support-based version, which are a half-strength unit. Arimo Arantar, Arqueni Findicano, all of these really strong units as the trees disappear. Again, those armour-piercing missiles could be so important, and also the extremely strong armour-piercing and charge bonus that the Sons of Hurin here have. And then the final attacking army. I suppose it says a lot in my tone of voice that I have high hopes for Valinor on the defence here, even in face of all of this quality that the attackers are bringing to bear. Under normal circumstances, this would be a terrifying force to crash down upon this settlement, but given all of the elite units that Valinor have at their disposal, perhaps it's not an insurmountable task. We have Mevon playing as Doriath, an aggressive faction with a lot of armour piercing, which will be useful. Axemen of the Girdle for more projectiles. That's one way in which I think the attackers can establish themselves here. The fact that only the Teleri have got ranged power for Valinor means that the attackers could try to bully them a little bit with their skirmishers, but it is a longer way to play the game that. We'll see if they have the discipline. Shield Bearers of Rhegion, one of the more defensive units Doriath have. Big shields, more defensive than some of their other units. Sword Host of Rhegion as well, very strong unit of Elven infantry, not quite as heavily armoured as some of the other kingdoms of elves of Doriath, but they supplement that by having higher damage, of course. Overall, that's an oversimplification really, but it'll do for here. Spear Host of the Girdle, poison javelins. We've got some Wardens of the Girdle, so perhaps a lighter approach here from Doriath, which is quite interesting. Perhaps they know they can't outmuscle Valinor, so they're going to try instead to go for more of a soft touch. In there we also have the Tyrann Lysdannen, armour-piercing axe throwers, which again could be such an important unit given the situation is what it is. Marksmen of Rhegion, and then back here we have more marksmen, and finally here at the very back we have plenty of warriors as well, which is a completely unsurprising addition given the fact that they are a very strong armour-piercing unit, and you're going to need that sort of strength given that they are going up against some of, well, really the finest warriors in the world, I suppose. Given that this is the first time Valinor have appeared on my channel. I'm pretty excited to see what transpires. So I will make a little bit of a cut because I do believe they're going to allow Carmel to get back into a defensive shape along with his allies, and we will rejoin when the battle is joined. So as we get underway, the Teleri here, the sentries of Alqualonde, are going to be opening up on the attackers as they start to move forward. It is interesting actually that Melkon is the one that's leading the way. I wouldn't pick the Green Elves to be the ones to try and lead the way. Yes, they're leading the way with their archers, their scouts of Galleon, who are now going to pull back, but the Green Elves don't really do so well in a straight-up fight such as this. Their lighter armour is certainly going to leave them pretty exposed to the vicious arrows that the Teleri are letting loose here. So it's not too surprising to see the Green Elves move a little bit further backwards and allow perhaps, I think Fingolfin would be much better placed to be the first ones in. They certainly have heavier armour, they've got more of a focus around shielded units, certainly not quite so vulnerable to this sort of thing. However, I would say with the shoal runners of Alqualonde moving down here as well to try and move in and out, harass the attackers, maybe bait them into moving into full range of all of the defensive archers rather than just some of them. As good as the Teleri are in this sort of situation, offering that nice ranged presence that you will need as Valinor, I do think ranged is a way that they can potentially put a bit of pressure on here, the attackers, especially with stuff like the Tyrann lies down in here, really high damage stuff close up. That could be where they really start to make up some ground on the very, very strong Valinor defenders. Shoal hunters here once again. Well, actually no, not once again, these are the slingers of course. So the slingers doing that bit of armour piercing damage, which is going to be really nice for Valinor as well. But yeah, do they have enough with regards to their ranged units here for this to be viable in the long run here, as a Grey Ghost is also now going to be opening up with his sentries. Some of those being blank fires, Axemen of the Girdle moving forward. I mean, these are shield bearers, have got a nice shield value on them, I suppose, but yeah, meanwhile over here, Spear Host of Galleon just checking out the docks, occupying them. And then over here we have a singular unit of the Scouts of Galleon moving forward. It is perhaps a good thing that Valinor today have only got those horse archers as their mounted options, otherwise sending a unit like this forward all on their lonesome would be a terrible idea. They'd be run down by any cavalry given that they are light archers. But the Scouts of Galleon landing the first blows onto the defensive position here of Valinor. The Grieving Sons, not a bad target at all. There are stronger units of infantry that Valinor have at their disposal, certainly, but they are lightly armoured as the Teleri are, and also unshielded, so trying to take away a bit of their numbers here on the defence of Valinor. And there comes a certain point where it doesn't really matter how elite you are, if you don't have the bulk to hold on to your front lines, you're just going to get run over. So they do need to be very careful here. Meanwhile, Herdsmen of Dorloman moving forward. Shoal Runners taking a bit of counter fire at this point, but not the worst unit for Valinor to lose. As you can see there, the Herdsmen of Hithlum are the ones using their ammunition. They don't have that much ammo, but they are also fairly useful in melee, so you might want to use this ammunition early on some satellite or orbital targets like that, and then use them as light to medium axemen in melee a little bit more quickly. Interesting to see the use of fire arrows in the sentries of Alqualonde. Perhaps they feel as though they can strike some fear into the hearts of the men that are on the attack today. But I don't think the Herdsmen will rout all that easily, so I think it is maybe a little bit more of a waste than it would otherwise be. Shoal Hunters also using their slings to pretty good effect. It is interesting though to see so much ammunition being poured into, again, just these basic Fingolfin spears. Yes, the attackers are going to have lower quality armies overall, so it's not as if they're packed to the rafters with really elite stuff. But even so, I think there's a little bit too much of a focus going into breaking down the Fingolfin basic spears. Your infantry is going to be more than capable of dealing with the Edain auxiliaries, the shield bearers of Regium, maybe a little bit more of an understandable target, several of them falling by the wayside at the hands of these Shoal Hunters just in behind the first of the front lines. The Swan Guard of Alqualonde backed up by some of the Plaza Guardians. A very, very difficult foe to try and break down from the front purely in melee. You can see, in fact, I think that is not going to be their intent at all. They're going to try and use their Axemen of the Girdle. Hearthguard manning that ballista, perhaps going to go after the attacking artillery. Get my words out properly. Axemen of the Girdle going to be throwing into this front line. Most of the damage, however, well, all of the damage, at least to start with, is going to be done to the basic units of Swan Guard. Heading over to the other side, Scouts of Gellion, Spear Host of Brythombar from the Falathrim also moving forward. It's not too surprising to see the attackers try to open up in this way. Like I said, they certainly have more numerous ranged units, so it is a bit of a puzzle for Valinor to try and work out here. Spear Host of Brythombar are going to be moving forward, so we're going to be seeing once again the attempt made by the attackers to wear the defenders down, both with arrows and with throwing projectiles. Spear Host of Brythombar won't be up to much in melee compared to their cousins from the west, but that isn't really what they're going to be all about. Some Sentries of Alqualonde firing in, just giving the Spear Host of Brythombar something to think about, but there you can see going after the Sentinels of Tyrion, the Peacekeepers of Valinor. Yeah, they're going to need to engage in melee here, Valinor. They can't afford to just sort of sit here and take this kind of damage, so the attackers are going to be forcing the defenders' hands. The Swan Guard of Alqualonde moving downhill into the more scattered Spear Host, and that's going to be a certain victory for Valinor unless more reinforcements are forthcoming. Meanwhile, there are also the beginnings of a melee engagement over here. The Bladesmen of Barad Ithel, who are actually looking like they could rout there, and indeed the Firstmen of Dorloman do rout as a result of the fire arrows. You can see a little bit further down the mighty Sentinels of Tyrion in melee here, and the Firstmen of Dorloman find themselves thoroughly outmatched by this fantastic unit of heavy swordsmen. They are somewhat cut off though, they are going to need a bit of support at some stage. The Shoal Hunters moving down into melee now to mop up what remains of the Bladesmen of Barad Ithel, and even the more hardy elves of the Fingolfin ranks find themselves without enough support to keep their assault going, and they lose heart and rout. And that's not too surprising. That wasn't really too much of a committed assault, that from Fingolfin. Maybe just testing the waters, and Valinor's defences here have certainly not been found wanting. These Firstmen of Dorloman continuing to fight for the time being. Still more hits coming in from the Sentries of Alqualonde. Is that necessary? Will that be a key mistake that the defenders are making? We shall see. It's been the cause of defenders' losses more often than not. Shieldbearers of Rhegion in here. Still not too much damage has been done. Interesting to see the Axemen of the Girdle hold fire for the time being. It is just Doriath over here, to be fair, so Mevin has drawn the short straw in that regard, in the sense that he is going to have to try and solo his way through this defensive position, whereas the other 2 points are going to have 2 armies crashing down upon it. So they will have that in their favour. Sentinels of Tyrion going to be pulling back. Shoal Hunters moving back. They may well be out of ammunition, and they have got their maces out, so they double as armour-piercing light infantry in melee. Not too dissimilar, perhaps, to the Seafarers from the Falathrim, only they're of course a hybrid unit, which comes with certain downsides. Sentinels of Tyrion getting ready for another assault. The Firdsmen do return. Fierdsmen? Firdsmen? I should know that. That is an Anglo-Saxon word after all, but again, still more of a ranged threat coming from over here. Ossiriand and the Falathrim, with that combination of high damage javelins and archers at their disposal. They'll be hoping to do damage to Valinor in this manner. And it's not too surprising either, but they do need to be careful, because the Teleri are going to be able to do a good amount of damage. Swan Guard of Alqualonde do rout, there's not enough of them left to keep this lone assault going, but certainly Ossiriand, but even the Falathrim, with a large portion of their army, don't have the best armour values, so with all of these Teleri archers, could be the sort of thing which does a pretty hefty amount of damage. Again, they're using their fire arrows, perhaps trying to break these first few companies, break up the assault just a little bit. They're pulling back. I mean, there is an opportunity perhaps for the attackers to try and flood in through these gaps, but it would be fairly difficult to make that stick unless you are willing to go really all in, and I doubt they're going to feel so bold. Sentinels of Tyrion moving down into the somewhat scattered Spear Host of Gellion. This isn't going to go too well for the two-handed spears unless they can get back into formation and get their spears pointing in the right direction. Otherwise they could well find themselves getting butchered very quickly. But a javelin support wouldn't go amiss either. And the Spear Host of Brythombar are trying to do that, but with archers close by as well, it's not going to end well for the lightly armoured denizens of Ossiriand. Well, they are now pushing in here, Doriath. So Doriath perhaps the biggest commitment of infantry that we've seen so far. Several of the Rhegion units, so quite a lot of value here on this front line, but it is worth saying the Plaza Guardians are not actually engaged in melee, so it is just the Swan Guard that they're fighting, at least on this side of the line. is worth saying as well that some more of the Swan Guard are trying to push their way through, perhaps in an attempt to block the Axemen of the Girdle, but they're going to try and get a clear shot on the Plaza Guardians, which, just based on what I know, if I were in the attacker's situations, the Plaza Guardians would probably be the unit I would be looking to try and whittle down the most, because as long as they stay alive and in a solid position, it's going to be very difficult for you to push through. You can't rely on stuff like the longer range that perhaps Finarfin's pikes would offer you. You do have the pikes from Fingolfin, but they are the Edine pikes, which are certainly more fragile. So it is a difficult one. The Nobles of Balar can maybe do better than most in a grindy fight against them, but they would still end up losing out, I think, because of the armour piercing and the multiple HP that the Plaza Guardians have. The Shield Bearers just waiting here in the background. Bit of a weird fight, this. And there you can see the Hearthguard of Tyrion, the Ballista crew, actually dismounting from the Ballista and getting into melee, and that has proven to be too much for the Sword Host of Bregion. And again, while it was a decent commitment, it wasn't enough here. I think trying to wear down Valinor in this way is not going to work out too well for you. You either need to be really cautious and take things slow with the ranged units, or you need to be far more forthright than that. And as you can see, just sending forward one unit on their own. And these are sturdy units of Elven heavier infantry that we're seeing routing in several parts of the field here. They're going after the Shoal Hunters, trying to catch them out in melee, but all they're going to get is another unit of Sentinels of Tyrion engaging them. And once again, as accomplished as this Sword Host unit is in melee, they are going to find themselves outmatched 1-to-1. But they are getting more support here, and this is a little bit more like it from Doriath. They're spreading out, they're seeing that there are gaps. The Plaza Guardians were not covering the whole of the road, and as a result, the Plaza Guardians are actually shaken. A big part of that is going to be down to the poison projectiles that some of Doriath's units have, but they are wavering, and as a result of this front line not being all that well organised, they could take real advantage here. Bit of a misstep there from Valinor. All you need to do is keep your line solid, and he wasn't able to do that there, Grey Ghost, and he could carry with it the need to effectively pull back from the first layer for his entire team. We all are fully aware of the domino effect that can happen. Interestingly enough, Captain Gervais is still being more aggressive than anything else. Herdsman of Hithlum meeting the Shoal Hunters of Alcolonde in melee here. I think it is only Herdsman of Hithlum that are here. Once again, trying to get away with committing not an awful lot to this fight. And these Axemen would be quite useful if used in a supporting role against the heavier units from Valinor, not so much against the more lightly armoured Alcolonde units. And those maces, yeah, they should be able to overcome these herdsmen here. There's more of the Teleri here, and of course with a bit of support as well from the Shoal Runners. They can charge into the back of them, potentially another unit of herdsmen. They're very depleted indeed. They still have a bit of ammunition actually, those horse archers. Meanwhile, we are seeing more of a sustained melee engagement over here. More Spear Host of Brythombar taking more fiery projectiles. Still, this fight continues. Spear Host of Brythombar in here against the Sentinels of Tyrion as well. Scouts of Galleon trying to push forward to help the Spear Host. It is a testament to the Spear Host of Galleon that they are still fighting against a unit of this quality. It does go to show what a useful thing that phalanx formation can... Actually, no, not... Yeah, they do have phalanx formation. They're not pikes, though. Another unit of Spear Host moving in. Wollywolf and Tundra's Fox certainly being cautious. They're committing forward only their entry-level units so far, but considering how well Doriath have actually done over on the other side, if you're paying attention as the attackers, this may very well be the right call to make. There's no need to go all in this sort of situation. No need to force anything to happen just yet, especially when Carmel has got a pretty nasty defensive line that includes plenty of Valimar units. The Light Elves, I believe, is what they are. More Sentinels of Tyrion down there. Armatar of Barad-Ithel moving forward. That pretty much is the sign, I think, that Fingolfin have had enough of these Teleri getting in the way, and they want to finally move them on. And armour piercing will be slightly more useful, actually, against the heavier units of Fingolfin, but they are going to get overrun here, surely, and break in short order. Marines of Vinyamar moving forward to offer a little bit of support as well. Javelins and axe throwers, as I said, one of those tools that the attackers can use to really good effect here, and they are going to start moving backwards now, unsurprisingly, and this will be the reason for that. Doriath performing very nicely on that front line, taking advantage of the rather large gaps, honestly, that Grey Ghost and his Valinor army had left. Evan doing very nicely for himself there, and this of course is the avenue where only one army was attacking down, although it does look as though Melkon has sent over a little bit of support now. Some archers from Ossiriand certainly will not go amiss. A little bit of damage there. Shoal Hunters of Alqualonde are going to have to be left behind, really. So it has proven to be a bit of a disastrous defence on this front line by Grey Ghost. And he is going to need to redeem himself later on in the fight. Fortunately for him, that defence up there looks even easier to keep track of. And he is going to be less inclined to split his army up as the map gets smaller. So all is not lost, and as the map gets smaller, we may very well get to see Valinor's elite nature really start to pay dividends. Arqueni Findacano moving in here as well, that really nasty unit of Fingolfin cavalry. I'm a little bit surprised we didn't see them take a more active role in dispersing the shoal runners earlier on. But those armour-piercing missiles can be saved and be used to really good effect later on. Probably one of the most stunning looking units, the Arqueni Findacano. Not that Silmarillion is short on high quality unit models. More sentries of Alqualonde over here. I do think Carmel needs to start thinking about pulling back. I don't know what Captain Gervais is doing. He's got a few of his units still in this area. Perhaps they feel as though they can still hold on over here. After all, that does give them a good opportunity to shoot right through them with the sentries of Alqualonde. Yeah, this is fine actually. There's no way that the attackers can buckle them from different directions now. Sentries of Alqualonde are here, getting into melee with the sentries of Tyrion, pushing back against the Armatar of Barad Aithel, who were the straw that broke the camel's back, dispersing the Teleri further down the hill. Marines of Vinyamar moving forward, Herdsmen of Hithlum doing the same. More javelins, of course, but more fire arrows coming forward. We did see the sentries of Alqualonde use standard shot earlier on in the battle. If I didn't know any better, I'd say that this was sort of their projectile. We can see more examples of regular arrows coming from the shoal runners there. Marines of Vinyamar are a worthwhile target to go after in this situation. They're not the tankiest, they are shielded, but Fingolfin certainly has better units when it comes to withstanding arrow fire, and they do represent a real threat. Hunters of Rathloriel moving forward. Again, another example of more javelins. A wise move, as I said, to try and invest in this kind of unit, going after now the Valinor units, the Plaza Guardians and the Peacekeepers in a very intimidating looking line, but more javelins hit. I mean, harassment javelins are not going to be terribly effective if the Peacekeepers are in here because of those shields, because they are non-AP javelins, of course, but as soon as you get one of those hard target javelins in here, it could prove to get quite messy. The Grieving Suns now moving forward. The Elves showcasing their mastery with the two-handed blade. Sentinels of Tyrion pushing further downhill, getting into the Hunters of Rathloriel. Actually, not enough infantry on the front from Fingolfin and Ossiriand to stop Valinor's forward momentum, and they're going to get in and amongst these javelins here. A single unit of Sentinels of Tyrion is going to be enough to cause real trouble to Hunters of Rathloriel. Of course, the further they get away from support, they could overextend with this unit, and every unit lost is going to be a tragedy for the defenders here. Evan wasting no time in getting ready, stacking up on his next offensive. Sentries of Alqualonde firing downhill, trying to do damage to Doriath as they move forward. Shield Bearers, Doriath's tankiest unit from the front, with that outside of their bodyguards, with the big shield that they have. But Doriath, generally speaking, there are certainly heavier elven factions. Under sustained arrow fire, they may start to show cracks. They're looking pretty good, Doriath, still. Goes to show how much of a misstep it was earlier on. Meanwhile, using that catapult now. Are there any worthwhile targets here? I mean, Hunters of Rathloriel trying to do their thing. Still, those Sentinels of Tyrion fighting. Still, it says victory seems certain as well. I doubt that's going to be the case now, because a freshly arrived unit of Maithern and Tolgalen will finally be able to get this unit of heavy swordsmen out of the way. Decent hit there, bisecting the Hunters of Rathloriel. Really good hits, actually. Cutting that unit down to size. You need to be careful about firing from that range and at that angle, because you're not guaranteed good hits, but getting rather fortunate there. Skirmishers of Rathloriel doing their thing as well. Heavier archers from the Scouts of Gallion. You can see the stones coming forth from the Shoal Hunters as well. We're trying to push forward now. Warriors of Aglarast. A little bit more of a concerted effort this from the Falathrim and the Green Elves to try and get their way through this position. Once again, the Plaza Guardians of Valinor are not actually in melee, they're just in behind the unit they're meant to be anchoring. We saw that had disastrous consequences over on the other side of the field, where they weren't really involved until it was already far, far too late. The Swan Guard are doing a decent job here against the Falathrim. They're going to try and go around once again the Plaza Guardians, so clearly the attackers are well aware of the fact they don't want to just get caught on the end of those armour-piercing spears for an extremely long length of time. Those fire arrows shooting the Hunts of Rathloriel at point-blank range. They do get in behind enemy lines, they do engage the archers. Any supporting units that can get rid of this nuisance? I mean, they're only shaken now rather than wavering. It seems certain. Well, a little bit further down, some more sentries. The Kinsmen of Ingwe are down here for Carmel, so he does have support should he want to call upon it. And we can see here that this assault has, at least in infantry terms, been completely broken up so far. And once again, we're back to trading blows at range. Sentries of Alcolonde using their flaming shot. Hunters of Rathloriel trying to use those javelins. Another unit of Armatar of Barad-Ithel moving in to go after those sentries of Alcolonde, but that is more of a red herring than anything else, because they're out of ammunition already. Yes, the Armatar will defeat them handily in melee, but as soon as one of the genuine infantry units from Valinor come forward, that's where even a unit of this quality is going to struggle a little bit. Randirim and Tolgalen, those body-piercing arrows could be so devastating. We all know that body-piercing arrows really represent the highest potential kill total of any type of unit that there is. Shoal Hunters continuing to use those slings. And they could be a really important unit. It'd be really interesting to see how much damage they've been able to do when the battle is over. It's interesting to see Grey Ghost go after Doriath like this. Like, the Sentries of Alcolonde are not going to be able to withstand the Regian units in melee without significant support. The Shoal Hunters are a little bit better in melee, pulling out those maces. But even they are not going to be doing too well, and what this smacks of to me is maybe a less experienced player that is being flummoxed a little bit by the fact that the attackers are using their ranged units really very well. And Mevin, of course, is a name that we know on this channel very well, and I feel as though that's what's happening here. I think Grey Ghost isn't really responding to this kind of play from the attackers in the way that is necessary. And we've seen many siege battles in the past where even when the defenders do respond pretty well to that sort of thing, they still aren't able to withstand it. And there we can see the Sentries of Alcolonde doing well. I mean, Captain Gervais and Carmel are more experienced players, we know that for a fact. Yeah, I think now is the time to cut your losses and retreat, honestly. It's not going too well against Doriath over on the other side of the field. And I think now you just need to understand that make the battlefield as small as possible, and if need be you can then support more directly your less experienced ally. And yeah, you can see here, again, Peacekeepers of Valinor. For all of my bigging up of the Valinor infantry, so far I have to say, the two defenders on the flanks have been rather wasteful, with some really important units for them. And the attackers have gone about their business in a really effective way. Ondo Hyando and San Athrad, those armour-piercing missiles from them, could be extremely important as well. Maithern and Tolgalen using their maces to really good effect. But yeah, they need to do better here, Valinor, otherwise they're going to be on the receiving end of a bit of a hiding, which wouldn't exactly be the best way to introduce the faction now, would it? But it is what it is. Captain Gervais still has a few units left behind as a bit of a rearguard action. Sentinels of Tyrion probably overall have been the best performing Valinor units so far. We've definitely seen them hew their way through many of the attackers thus far. Some of the grieving sons trying to hot-foot it away from here before they get cut off. They aren't going to be given the opportunity to do that before the Marines of Brithombar slice through them with those javelins though. Again, that's good battlefield awareness from Wally Wolf. And they are not going to be allowed to retreat by any means. Another unit of 25 Sentinels of Tyrion as well. The Warriors of Aglarest are going to cut them off. And that is bad news. More bad news, it must be said. And again, just look at that, those Plaza Guardians attracting the attention of the Ondo Hyando. You can see the green streaks on the armour-piercing missiles. And they've dealt with the really elite infantry of Valinor really quite well so far. And this perhaps highlights the weakness that Valinor do have. It's the fact that you ultimately cannot force, when you're in this situation you're having to defend, you cannot force the attackers to throw themselves upon your extremely powerful front line. Again, Grey Ghost is going to be forced backwards here. I mean, if he's just going to move backwards a little bit, he would have been better off staying behind the shields of the Hearthguard, but if he is going to move backwards all the way, then fair enough. The Teleri so far have been the ones to pay most of the price, at least in terms of lives lost, for Valinor's backwards motion. And so far the momentum is with the attackers. That much cannot be denied. They're going to need to utilise these defensive positions better than they have the initial ones that they have had. Shoal Hunters doing damage on the approach to yet more of the Gellian units. They've been used as a bit of a punching bag so far, but I guess something had to be. The fodder. It's not often the elves need to utilise fodder, but this is one of those situations. The Grieving Sun's routing. Warriors of Eglarest outnumbering them very handily. And there are also these Sentinels of Tyrion over here who are doing a good job against the Mythern and Tolgalen, actually carving through them quite nicely. They will of course be overwhelmed and destroyed now, but it does go to show this pretty much the best that the Green Elves have to offer in melee, and they were losing out to the Sons of Tyrion there. Sentinels of Tyrion, I should say. Marines of Eglarest moving into position there as well. More of the slings, doing some good damage here to the bunched up Warriors of Eglarest, and the damage they're taking very, very fast, enough to cause the medium infantry of the Falathrim to start to waver. Arqueni Findicano pulling out their 2 blades. Going to try and charge in here. I think you do quite well. Yeah, I was going to say, Sentinels of Tyrion there would have done quite well to not rout under this much pressure, and indeed they do. Cut off as they are. More flaming shot. There's still some units in behind here. Sentries of Alqualonde. They're still having to shoot over their own men though, Valinor, so maybe not quite the jackpot shot they were hoping for against all of these Rathloriel spears. That was another unit then, but it's not, it's just the terrain. Meanwhile, still, if it ain't broke, don't fix it really, from an attacker perspective. If you still have the ammunition to continue in the vein that you have been doing so up till now, you should. And indeed, I think that is what they are doing. Javelins, Marines of Brythombar, whittling down this front line ever further. It's going to be the ultimate litmus test really of just how strong these Valinor units are, given the fact that the attackers have been so eager to try and whittle them down. There are those Kinsmen of Ingwe as well, which fortunately Carmel did manage to save. They were not left behind in, again, somewhat of a messy retreat. They tried to hold this position, and they could have, given the fact that Doriath couldn't go directly for them, but in the end it didn't really end up working out for them. Carmel suffered a similar fate, albeit not quite so crushing as his ally did over on this side, and still, I have to say, the Teleri have done quite well to continue to fight in the manner that they have, but Doriath so far, I would give them the MVP. Nevin has done really very well forcing Valinor back. The Winds of the Girdle are here. The Shoal Hunters continue to do some good damage. Going after the Wards of the Girdle, but they're scattering a little bit, trying to present less of a clear target to their foe. Scouts of Gellion moving forward. Lots of dead Teleri there on the floor. Tyrion lies down, and that's a really scary unit from a Valinor perspective that is still alive. If you can focus them down, then you absolutely should. Skirmishers of Rathloriel taking hits from those slings, but they're clearly out of ammunition, given the fact they've got their swords out, so I'm not entirely sure why they are the target of your ire. You're better off going for the skirmishers that are behind. In fact, I think well, no, they're not. Again, weird choices of targets here for Valinor. Given the fact that ranged was always going to be how the attackers would try to open up a bit of an advantage, they've been quite clumsy with their ranged units, and they could well carry with it their destruction. There's really no need for going after the Rathloriel units in this manner. Marines of Eglarest are going to use their javelins on the Valimar units, responding in kind. Not quite as devastating looking, but overall it is perhaps a more efficient way of going about things. Earth and Tower waiting their chance as well. Still have their ammunition. Still a very useful axeman unit later on. Marksmen of Balar. Still the nobles of Balar as well, way down there with the Aran Kia Lim. Some of the Noldor of Middle-earth rather than the shores of Valinor. Will they yet prove their superiority in this battle? And the ballista for the attackers as well, slicing their way through the Valinor units, which we haven't really got to see shine yet. They're such a potent force on the front line, but the attackers, well aware of that, have been trying to slowly take them apart piece by piece. More Shoal Hunters. There are Plaza Guardians in there, which perhaps would be an even better target. I mean, they're only killing 1 or 2 at a time, but that is going to be enough to worry the defenders here, surely. Meanwhile, the Vaglares continuing to try and do damage. Several of the Vanyar here are bloodied. Peacekeepers of Valinor continuing to take hits. A little bit of a lull in proceedings, you would have to say, at this point, as the attackers biding their time, still trying to chip away at that strength that Valinor have before ultimately they will at some stage have to commit to an all-out assault. The question is, will Valinor be sufficiently weakened by the time that comes around? Sentries of Alqualonde are going to potentially break from formation here to move downhill to go after the Hunters of Rathloriel. I mean, that's still a pretty good defensive position. You could move forwards with your front line here if you're Cabal and try and stop the Hunters from doing this. They're not getting tons and tons of kills, but every kill they get brings the attackers closer to victory. Lots of Grieving Sons and Sentinels of Tyrion, plenty of heavy swordsmen. Sentinels of Tyrion are over here. Shoal Hunters, alongside the Sentinels of Tyrion, have perhaps been Valinor's most impressive unit so far, if for no other reason than when the attackers have moved forward, they've been the ranged unit which has answered the call to arms. Again, I'm not entirely sure if it's the best use of that ammunition, man, from Captain Gervais. A lot of units just waiting. Do they have a choice though? Unit 26 Wardens of the Girdle are going to attempt to dump all of their ammunition before moving forwards. Side, Sentries of Alqualonde taking up another firing position using standard shot now. Flaming shot is not going to be enough to rout these units, you wouldn't have thought, although there are a few burning Galleon units on the front line. There's be a host of Galleon moving in to perhaps try and dissuade any sort of counter-attack from this Valinor defensive position. Scouts of Galleon firing away. Actually, it's about time. I'm going to go up to ×2 speed as we settle into static positions on the map now, because I think it is going to settle into this in the middle portion of the battlefield. Valinor clearly don't want to counter-attack, which is not too surprising. If they get drawn into the more open parts of the battlefield, it's going to be a real problem for them. Even with all their elite units, they will be surrounded and destroyed, as we saw so well demonstrated by Mevon's Doriath push early on. Sholran has only 10 of them, but 2 can play that game. The fleeted skirmishers will have a part to play in this battle. Still over here, Ossiriand and the Falathrim, Ossiriand and Doriath over on the other side, and then I would assume Fingolfin will fill the void of support for the rest of the battle. Shoal Hunters waiting, perhaps out of ammunition. That bit of armor-piercing bite that they have, to be fair, it's not the most heavily armoured attacking force. You've got the Noldor from the Falathrim, and you've got some of the heavier units from Doriath, but other than that, it's a fairly lightly armoured attacking force. Slowly but surely picking their way through these Valinor units. Scouts of Galleon revealing themselves, skirmishers of Rathloriel. How much of this can Valinor take? I mean, with all of these multiple HP units, they are, at least on individual terms, the tankiest faction in the game, I suppose, with that designation, but this is fairly consistent pressure that they're having to withstand here. If I were Valinor, I would honestly pull back again, because you're getting bullied at this point in time. You're just getting pulled all over the field, and the way that Valinor have responded to this pressure so far has not really been what I would have recommended. A little bit wasteful, a little bit clumsy, and they're going to need to do better, even with all of their elite tools. Sentries of Alqualonde up here. What are they actually targeting? Again, Marines of Eglorest, is that the wisest choice? From the front, their shields are coming into effect. By Falathrim standards, they're a medium unit of infantry. So they're not one of those units which, yes, it's not high tier, but they're so fragile you need to go after them. Neither are they a high tier unit in and of themselves. Ossiriand's ballista crew makes their way forward. More javelins. Spear host of the girdle. Trying to use those shoal hunters to good effect. And still, we're yet to see the melee engagement get underway, which will be the cue for us moving back down to 1 speed. Is this going to be another counter-attack here from Valinor? Possibly, but sending out just 1 unit of Sentinels of Tyrion? Is that the answer? I mean, clearly they're getting frustrated and they want to go after stuff like these javelins, but I mean, yes, the Sentinels of Tyrion will carve their way through Scouts of Gellion, but it's another sign that an individual unit has been pulled out of position. Can they surround and destroy that unit now? Bit of a melee engagement happening over here, going after the sentries of Alcolonde, where the line is at its weakest. Marines of Eglorest and Skirmishers of Rathloriel are going to try and dismantle them, and you can see there that this catapult getting into position from Captain Gervais, but getting into full view there of the armor-piercing arrows, which immediately just demolish the catapult. Captain Gervais trying to get his artillery into a good position to be used, but in the end just ends up getting his artillery destroyed. It's been the story of this battle so far from Valinor. If I weren't so sure of their qualities in melee, I'd say this was a battle that was already mostly over. If the attackers just continue to approach the battle in the way they have up till now, nice and cautious, and then ultimately when the attackers are softened up sufficiently, just roll forwards with all of your numbers. But it's not quite that simple, given the qualities on display. Hunts of Rathloriel defeat seems certain. Javelins. Going after the Sentinels of Tyrion, who have proven their worth so far. And over on the other side, we can see the Shoal Runners. Is it more of a concerted effort? That's not really, you'd have to say. Again, more out-of-ammunition Teleri archers being committed forwards. Going into the out-of-ammo ballista crew. Scouts of Gellion have broken as a result of the robust assault from the Sentinels of Tyrion. They're not without casualties taken, though, at this stage. Spear host of the girdle. You're better off going into melee. I mean, at this point, they're so close that you may as well close up and commit your Peacekeepers of Vanyar to try and finish off these girdle units from Doriath. Shoal hunters of Alcolonde waiting in the wings. It is interesting that defeat is still a possibility for them, given the fact that the Sentinels of Tyrion, they are taking more and more damage here, and I suppose it does come down in many ways to sheer numbers. Again, committing forward individual units like this hasn't really gone too well for them. Marksmen of Rhegion pulling out their swords in melee, having a duel with the Sentinels of Tyrion. No, not so much a duel. In a straight up duel they would lose fairly comfortably, but that isn't the case here. We're finally getting to see some of the Valimar units used in melee. Earlier examples of the front lines made by Valinor were such that the Valimar units weren't actually engaged when the units they were meant to be supporting were. Now, though, they are going to be in melee, and this is going to be a real problem for the Green Elves. The Kinsmen of Ingwe thinking of moving forwards, thinking of getting involved, but deciding better of it, moving to a different part of the front line. We'll hear yet more of the Sentinels carving their way through the Eglorest units from the Elves of the Phalos. More warriors of Eglorest. Skirmishers of Rathloriel moving forward, committing forward. More numbers to this fight. Hearthguard of Tyrion moving forward. A very strong unit indeed. The Kinsmen of Ingwe do now move into melee. Skirmishers of Rathloriel, of course, are not going to be able to withstand such a unit. Especially not when the Hearthguard are also moving forward. So they're serious about holding on to this front line, Valinor, which is good to see. This is perhaps the first opportunity they've had to get involved in a real blood and thunder kind of line fight like this. And unsurprisingly, the Falathrim and Ossiriand look like they're struggling with it. But there's plenty more where that came from, of course. They've yet to commit their strongest units yet. The Earth in Tower starting to fire on a more exposed part of the front line. Of course, when they're out of ammunition, their axes will come in very handy as well for the attackers. Oof, that frame rate though. Starting to judder a little bit. Scouts of Galleon moving forward, the pikes as well. Sentries of Hithlum, so trying to hold the light elves at arm's length here, the attackers. And perhaps seeing the fact that Valinor have used a lot of their ammunition already, the opportunity is here for Fingolfin to do so without that much in the way of consequences. And moving forward now, the Peacekeepers of Valinor. The armour piercing isn't going to be all that useful against the Edain auxiliaries from Fingolfin and the Gellian units from Ossiriand. A little further back, they do have some sentries that could move forward at any moment, shoal hunters, a lot of Teleri, but not an awful lot of other really high-end infantry units. Once again, it doesn't look as though Peacekeepers are there. We're seeing some of those two-handed spears get in, but you need more of your two-handed spears engaged at this point, I think. It's been a real theme of this battle so far. They just haven't pushed the Plaza Guardians forward far enough to actually be in melee. It's a bizarre and somewhat rookie mistake, but if they intend to have that as their front line, they should be in melee. If they don't intend to commit them to the fight, then this is the moment that you should be retreating them or getting them out of harm's way. Hunters of Rathloriel trying to overrun this front line, trying to get in behind here. Shoal Hunters of Alqualonde are wavering themselves. Bit of a weird situation with both units to be thinking about running for the hills. Much more understandable for the Hunters to be thinking about taking such an action. The Earthen Tower trying to back them up, however. As I said, those axes could be absolutely vital. But again, it's another gap in the defences here which Valinor have left. They really need to try and address that moving into the final stages of the fight. If that happens much more, they will stand no chance. These are the kind of errors which, if you don't have all of this elite infantry to fall back upon, will be your demise. It's a little bit surprising to see players who have played the game so often make these kind of errors, even with my long hiatus from the game, playing myself. That's the sort of thing that I would work to avoid. Sentinels of Tyrion are in here. Shoal Runners of Alqualonde doing damage in the backfield. Sentries of Alqualonde on the front line, joining with the Noldor and the Vanyar. And the Spear Host of Galleon finding themselves outmatched in the spear fight by the Plaza Guardians, and we're starting to see more examples of routing. So Tundra's Fox and Wallywall starting to struggle a little bit more. The Ondo Hyando pulling out their dual axes. They already did a decent amount of damage in this fight already. They will have to have the rest of their contribution in melee. They're not actually the finest melee combatants, they're more of a medium tier unit in melee. Those armor piercing missiles are really what sets them apart. Over here, meanwhile, Doriath, will they continue their good performances? Well, mostly it's Ossiriand that have taken up the banner on this fight now, along with Fingolfin. Earthen Tower trying to fight on the front line, trying to lay down some of that armor piercing damage, give this assault the bite it needs to carry them to victory. Peacekeepers of Valinor and the Plaza Guardians fighting in tandem with one another, as was intended. Ondo Hyando trying to get some shots in now. They are getting some hits, but most of it is on Sentries of Alqualonde, which, on balance, Valinor won't mind too much. But have they already taken too many losses for this to be something they're comfortable with? They're also using the Randirim, so this is really both of Melkon's heavy hitters at range in terms of damage dealing. And he is pouring his ammunition into this defensive position now. Perhaps he's hoping to break the spirit of this front line now and follow suit where Doriath picked up the torch earlier. Plaza Guardians. There's Earthen Tower. Mythern and Tolgalen as well, offering yet more armour piercing to this front line. The Green Elves doing their thing. Shoal Hunters are there. Catapult crew as well, of course, being a half-strength unit of the Hearthguard. Peacekeepers of Valinor and those Plaza Guardians still fighting hard on the front line, being joined by those Hearthguard of Tyrion. Now, really love the shield model for them. Just in general, their colour scheme is looking very regal indeed. More Earthen Tower pushing their way forwards with the support of the Foresters of Nimbrethil. Shoal Hunters of Alqualonde shoring up the line as well. Still those armor-piercing spears. The two-handed version of they close enough. Kinsmen of Ingwe taking a couple of losses. They are bloodied up after being in melee a little bit already. More of the slings. I mean, with the Earthen Tower on the front line, this is certainly a good moment to use those slingers, because this is a dangerous unit in melee, and it will offer that rigidity that the attackers are going to be looking for over here, at least in the absence of the more heavy Noldor units that the Falathrim will, of course, eventually commit to the fight. Herumatar of Barad-Ithel, so Fingolfin committing more of their units over here, you'd have to say. Also the Sentries of Hithlum being hoovered up at this point. Much more of a robust committal now by the defenders. Kinsmen of Ingwe joining the fight, really hoping to hold on to the situation down here. Very close range firing from the Marksmen of Rhegion. Trying to shoot right down the line, which again, still at this stage in the battlefield, the attackers will be hoping to use those ranged units to really good effect. As Mythen and Tolgalen still pretty healthy actually, but as I said, the Vanyar, they're more medium units. The Noldor units, the Tyrian ones, are the ones you want to be using that armour piercing on, and of course the Kinsmen of Ingwe, which are at the heart of this effort to hold on to this front line now. Herumatar of Barad-Ithel trying to keep things going for the attackers. Over here, Skirmish of Rathloril in behind enemy lines. They need to deal with this, the defenders, and I think they see that. They're going after them with some Sentinels of Tyrion. They need to stop any units from flooding over, because the integrity of their front line needs to be maintained if they're to hold on. And with Blade Master Barad-Ithel on the front line, they're a little bit more serious now about trying to capture this this position, but the Sentinels of Tyrion are in the way and showing them what a true heavy swordsman unit is all about. Plaza Guardians of Valinor defeat seems certain. That's a little bit surprising given the proximity of the Kinsmen of Ingwe as well. Numbers perhaps playing their part in that. The Foresters of Nembrithil as well, very similar to the Spears of Galleon that we've already seen. Sentinels of Tyrion now being committed to the front line. The Ondo Hyando going to try and use their dual axes to good effect on this front line. They are going to filter through here. Again, another gap being found, this time in the very centre of the line. And given the fact they had a heavy swordsman unit there to shore things up, it's again a bit of an error from the defenders, and they need to try and stop this. I mean, yes, with all of these units, they are broken here, these Skirmishes of Rathloril, and the Ondo Hyando may very well follow, because it is a lot to ask a unit to push through a Valinor front line like this, but it's happened often enough, and they do, fortunately for the defenders' rout, it's happened often enough at this point that you'd think the defenders would be learning from this, but again you can see Doriath finding a gap, and when Doriath has found gaps in this battle so far, excuse me, they've done so with Rhegion units and heavier, more dangerous units. Warriors of Rhegion as well with that armour piercing. It's really dangerous every time Doriath have decided to do this in this fight so far, and Grey Ghost has been on the receiving end of it every time. The Arqueni Findicano are going to try and push their way through here, and with some horses in behind enemy lines, that could be the sort of thing which wreaks a lot of havoc. As Ondo Hyando getting onto the front line as well. Like I said, they're not exactly an elite unit in melee, but they have had their part to play already, both at range and up close and personal. And now the Marksmen of Rhegion are shooting directly into the backs of this Valinor front line, and this could be the beginning of the end for the second tier of the Valinor defence as well. They may have to think about pulling back already, with Doriath once again at the forefront of Valinor's ultimate demise on these positions. Ondo Hyando last stand. Plaza Guardians are going to try and run away, but understandably Tundra's Fox is going to try and prevent them from doing so with his Mythen and Tolgalen. There's arrows coming forth as well. Foresters of Nembrithil fighting off against these Plaza Guardians who are still holding on, but they're ultimately going to get surrounded and destroyed, surely. Sooner rather than later. They don't want to be giving Valinor's elite units any chance to get really good value off, and they are going to pull back here now as well. Pull back to the very final stand. Assassins of Tyrion moving up the hill. Mython and Tolgalen, victory seems certain. I think the attackers have played this game really, really well, honestly, so far. In the face of such terrifying infantry units that were on the defence, they've handled it really well. I have to say the defenders have been quite clumsy up to this point as well, though. Some of the gaps that were left, you would have to say it's more defender error than attacker good play, but the attackers have done everything right so far, I'd have to say. Very little to criticise from their perspective, and they still have some really good heavy hits as well. Irimo Arantar, Sons of Hurin from Y2K and his Fingolfin army. Doriath have had a lot to give so far in this fight as well. Mevin's done really, really well. There's still the Noldor units from the Falathrim as well, the Spears of Balar, the Nobles of Balar I should say, the Iran Kielin. They're going to have plenty of strong units. The Arain Ephedun, a really tanky unit to have at the heart of their efforts to try and see themselves over the line, but will Valinor's elite units be enough for them to claw their way back into this game? We'll have to wait and see. I mean, Wally Wolf has clearly been trying to save his Nobles of Balar for later in the game when the Plaza Guardians are not here, because 1-to-1 the Nobles of Balar will struggle against the armour piercing and multiple HP nature of their brethren. And here you can see the Sentinels of Tyrion, defeat seems certain, utterly surrounded. Doriath coming to the aid of the Falathrim and the Green Elves. And with those axes in tow, completely surrounded, the Sentinels of Tyrion do break and they will be cut down to the last elf. Well, well, well. Irimo Arantar over here as well, getting their swords bloody before ultimately they will surely have a significant part to play if the attackers are to be victorious in this battle. It's about time I went back up to ×2 speed, to be honest. Ondo Hyando moving in, the Randirin, 41 of them. Herumatar of Barad-Ithel. Funnyfin Decano just trying to mop up what they can of these defending units. Going after the Sentinels of Tyrion. Need to be a little bit careful they don't get too close to the Plaza Guardians of Valinor. Otherwise they will be not long for this world. Kinsman of Ingwe as well. In fact, this might be a ×6 speed, to be honest. Given the fact that the attackers are going to have to reorganise themselves, having overcome those two defensive positions prior to now. And then get their armies into position. In fact, no way. Back down to 1 speed we go, because the Ondo Kando have ammunition still. Interesting choice by Melkon to commit them to melee while they still had ammunition left, but that will be a sting in the tail, which I'm sure the defenders wouldn't want to see. I think that was the rest of their ammunition, and the Randirim as well. And if anything, Valinor's weakness at range, being so reliant on a few Teleri units, has maybe been exposed a little bit in this fight, with how well the attackers have done with their own ranged units. Back up to ×6 speed as the attackers get ready for their final assault. We're moving in on the final 10k frames, and as is often the case, it will be the final phase in this battle. Are they going to roll into melee straight away? Perhaps not. Go down to 2 speed. There was actually some units. The Earth and End Tower decided to try their luck, get in behind enemy lines, go after the Shoal Hunters, which do have a bit of ammunition, so they do still have something to give at range here. But again, what are they going after? I don't know that they're going after anything, to be honest. That might be because they're being distracted in melee by a few of the Earth and End Tower that fought their way to that point. Shoal Hunters. Spear hosted there. Randirin trying to move into position. Surely they're out of ammunition at this point. Excuse me, I'm even losing my voice. Trying to record so much has already taken its effect. Marines of Prathomba still javelins. They've been so good at using their ranged units here, the attackers, and the defenders haven't really had an answer to it. Considering what Valinor are all about, it may have been worth their while to honestly try and counter-attack in the narrower parts of the battlefield, like this, for example. Maybe a little bit late to do that now, given the losses that they have already sustained at this point in time. They do still have a unit of archers as well. I mean, it is too much of a mountain to climb, even for Valinor's elite units, I would say, at this point. Given the fact that the Noldor from the Falathrim is still on the field, given the fact there's still something as dangerous as the Sons of Hurin, which can crack their way through even the armour of these Noldor, which are fighting hard. Sentinels of Tyrion victory seems certain. Spear Host of the Girdle getting into melee. The Plaza Guardians taking a bit of a kicking as well. We will go up to ×2 speed, I think, because I think the attackers are going to continue to commit piecemeal as they have done. They've been very patient, the attackers, and they have certainly been rewarded for the way that they've approached this game. Forward come the Marksmen of Rhegion, Warriors of Rhegion, Marines of Brythombar. Plaza Guardians of Valinor just waiting there menacingly, but once again, they're not in melee. The engagements are beginning, and ultimately at this point the attackers are going to force an engagement with the Plaza Guardians, but it's happened more than once in this. But again, like there's a unit in front of this prepared front line which is just getting munched on, and yeah, several errors in judgment, I would say, from the defenders on this occasion. We shall see what Valinor are like when they are backed into a corner, last stand style. Spear Host of Gellion moving forward. We do need to move forward with a little bit more gusto, I think, the attackers at this point in time. A little bit more quality on the front line is needed, maybe trying to get away with being a little bit too stingy. Marksmen of Balar starting to fire in. There's nothing for them to skirmish with at this point, so it's just going to be pure damage for them at range. A few poison projectiles coming in here as well. It is a nasty front line. This pretty much has been what Valinor have been looking for this whole time. The Vanyar backed up by some Noldor in a grindy front line fight, but the attackers have ultimately just not allowed them to do that enough in this battle for them to be satisfied with it. Tyrion lies down and are still waiting as well. I mean, again, they should really be pushing forward with this unit of Plaza Guardians, because for one, the infantry units in front of them need a little bit of support, but for two, they're exposed back here and they're getting hit by projectiles. Arimo Arantar joining the front line, that's the quality that would be needed. Fingolfin going to try and force the issue now. Marines of Brythombar are routing. It would be really unfortunate if the attackers were to throw this by not committing enough quality to back up their units. I'd be extremely impressed with Valinor's power if they were able to fight back from this position. There are the Shoal Hunters as well, shooting into the backs of this position over here. Foresters moving in. Surely the Tyrion lies down and will have something to say about this as well. Marksmen of Balar surely are going to try and shoot into this position that the Vanyar are occupying. That medium armour makes them a better target. And they will need to do a little bit of damage here, because they are in a little bit of danger of allowing their momentum to falter a little bit here, the attackers. Forward comes some Marines of Brythombar. There's the Aran Lim. Still some Sword Host of Rhegion back there. Sons of Hurin. I mean, that's a really tough unit, Sons of Hurin. Multiple HP, armour piercing. All the things which could lead to a grisly end for several of these denizens of the Blessed Realm. Still some Shoal Hunters there. Still a unit of the Grieving Sons. 113 of them is nothing to sniff at, but Remo Arantar fighting uphill into the jaws of these units. I'm a little bit surprised that the attackers haven't switched into being hyper-aggressive at this point, because this is how Valinor could start to make a comeback. If you just filter units into a front line like this, you're not going to get much of a return from your assault. Here come the Sons of Hurin though. Surely they will have a little bit better of a time against this front line if they can find a gap, and there is a bit of a gap in the middle if the Sons of Hurin choose to try and exploit it. We've seen them used to exceptional effect in the past, of course. What's that we've got over there? Shoal Hunters of Alcalonde leaving. Some more Spear Hosts of the Girdle, 143 spearmen. And also we've got the mighty Nobles of Balar as well, which will try to contest the two-handed spear game with the Plaza Guardians. Under normal circumstances they'd lose fairly handily, but Plaza Guardians have already seen a lot of action. Nobles of Balar are fully healthy and ready to go. Aran Lim are pushing in with the Sons of Hurin now as well. This is a little bit more like it. This is the fate I felt would befall the defenders. The Grieving Sons are going to block the gap that was appearing in the front line, to be fair, but will that be enough? probably not in the long run. More sling damage. Tyrion lies down under there. Marines of Eglorest are returning fire. Those javelins and also arrows finding their mark into the more lightly armoured Teleri. Throwing projectiles. Doing very well here though, the Vanyar, aren't they, on this front line? Sons of Húrin. Those nobles of Baelor taking damage from the projectiles that the Shoal Hunters can provide. There is still that one unit of sentries as well, so there is a bit more Teleri that can be committed to this front line, so they're not completely spent yet, Valinor, but I'd be really surprised. It might honestly be a little bit overkill if they were able to come back from this in melee, given the fact that the attackers had them right where they wanted them, and by the grace of having extremely powerful spears and two-handed spears, they could go on to win this. There's another unit of Aran Kielin trying to go toe-to-toe with their brothers from across the sea. With the heavily armoured Falathrim Noldor now being committed to the fight, it is a sign that the attackers are starting to go with more of an all-in kind of mentality. There's another unit of nobles that could be committed, marksmen. The remnants of Doriath can also be committed. Ooh, they're finding another gap. This has been the story of the attackers' success so far, and the Marines of Eglorest do find a gap. They could end up routing under the weight of all of these Alcalonde units, but I think at this point the attackers are going to smell blood in the water. They're going to try and push through with a unit of out-of-ammunition marksmen of Baelor as well to try and consolidate the gains of those Marines. Victory seems certain. Marksmen of Baelor, all of the Irimo Arantar pretty much have gone. There's a few left in there here and there. The Sons of Húrin have taken a lot of damage as well. Mython and Tol Galem with 58 of them. They're going all in now, the attackers, and that should be enough to see them over the line. There are the Shoal Hunters. Sentries, they still have a bit of ammunition, they're trying to use it, but ultimately they're going to be hounded into submission. It is going to be within 10% though, this fight, which, considering all of the missteps that the defenders made earlier on, if they had been a little bit more on the ball in this battle, Valinor would have won this through strength at arms here in the late game. But ultimately the mountain they were left to climb was just a little bit too big, and that is their own fault ultimately, so I think the attackers are worthy victors on this occasion. Grieving Sons continue to fight. They're doing very well against very elite opposition, to be fair, which, given the fact that this is the lightest heavy swordsman, which is a bit of an oxymoron I suppose, but the lightest swordsman that Valinor can field, they're still doing very well against the likes of Mython and Tol Galen, Sons of Húrin. Tyrion lies down and moving in, trying to grab a piece of the action. Doriath once again involved as they find a gap, although this time the Falathrim can take credit really for being the instigators of finally buckling this final Valinor defensive position. But I would still give the ultimately the MVP of this game to Doriath. Twice they were able to find the weakness in defensive points, and he did so very, very nicely. But overall I think the attackers just played this game very nicely, and they are certainly worthy victors. One of the most textbook attacking performances I think I've seen in a while, and perhaps this is because everyone was on their game. They knew the danger that the infantry from Valinor represented, and so they knew that they had to be on the ball. They were concentrating, they used their ranged units very well, and when the time came to be aggressive, ultimately they were. And that is the difference maker here. Still some Valimar units, ultimately completely surrounded though. Orion Effadoon. The Falathrim, probably the healthiest army still left on the field. The Green Elves almost completely spent. It's been a bloody fight for them. Fingolfin, there's not too much of them left. Doriath are pretty deflated as well. Makes a bit of sense though. The Falathrim here in the late game, they committed their Noldor, which are going to be a little bit more resilient, even against this kind of opposition. Some Hearthguard, the Catapult crew being hounded by these Doriath units, and now all of the generals are going to start to fall in quick succession. We haven't actually seen any fallen generals yet, so they're all going to die here in the late game, long after the outcome of the battle was actually decided. Sons of Húrin, only 14 of them left, which, given how strong a unit they are, it goes to show what a meat grinder that Valinor front line can be, but the attackers circumvented it for the most part in this battle, and as a result they are the ones that ultimately win the day. And the Blessed Realm is now the conquered realm. All of these elves, with a few men in tow, have overcome the best that the Blessed Realm has to offer. Perhaps with the 2 Maiar units, we can see Valinor in the near future as well. Very good battle, though. You can see there that Valinor's icon for the time being is the Rohirrim one, but that will, of course, change. If you want to see what it will look like, actually, I will once again point you towards J-Monster's video, because that is in the thumbnail. But a really good battle, I think. Yes, the defenders, I think they will go away from this battle feeling a bit disappointed, because ultimately they were the masters of their own destruction there by leaving those gaps in the line and by allowing the attackers to take advantage of them. But fair play to the attackers. Really good play with their ranged units. And when the time came to take advantage of those gaps and to be aggressive, they did so. Mevin really epitomised that, but also Wally Wolf there in the late game. Let's see what did the damage for the Valinor armies. The Peacekeepers of Valinor, well, actually the Sentries of Alqualonde doing very nicely, as you would expect perhaps in a 3v5 siege. The ranged units doing the business. Kinsmen of Ingwe as well. 325 on those Sentinels of Tyrion. Of all the melee units, it was definitely those Noldor heavy swordsmen, I think, that were ultimately the showstoppers here for Valinor. And considering the torrid time they had in this battle at times, it's still an impressive number of kills that a lot of these infantry units have got. Many of them getting over 200. Shoal Hunters of Alqualonde were another standout. I think they were the other unit really that really performed very, very nicely for Valinor. The Archers as well did okay, but you kind of expect that in a 3v5, like I said, because of the defensive position you have. Grey Ghost, he was the one that had the worst time of it, I would say, of all the defenders. Definitely Doriath exposed a lot of what he was trying to do. Sentinels of Tyrion, Kinsmen of Ingwe, yeah. No units breaking 200 kills, which in a 3v5 siege is a bit of a disaster. You know that you're onto a bit of a bad thing when that is the case. And indeed, he was lagging pretty far. In fact, it was 1,000 kill increments, really. And I do think Captain Gervais was probably the best performing of the defenders. There was less obvious gaps in what he was trying to do. But even he, could have come to the aid of his allies a little bit sooner than he did. But I won't complain too much, because ultimately the attackers were really good value for their money here, and they deserved it. So yeah, that is Valinor and the new map in Vinyamar that we got to show off today in a really substantial battle. Big thank you to Carmel, Lord of the Easterlings, for sending me this battle replay, giving me the opportunity I've been waiting for really to show off Valinor, and also a good opportunity to show off one of your fine creations as well. As for moving forward, going to be doing some more Third Age Reforged replays in the coming days and couple of weeks, but of course Silmarillion could also be on the agenda as well, given the fact that this new faction has been released and there is a fair amount going on there as well. Like I said, my schedule is... I did release that channel update a while back. Now, it is worth saying that I could go back to doing 2 videos a week sooner than I thought I would, but we'll have to see on that. There is a good deal of flux involved there, but we'll just have to wait and see. I really do want to, because it's healthier for the channel if I do those 2 videos a week, but we'll just have to wait and see ultimately. So yeah, I do know that J-Monster wanted me to show Valinor as well in some capacity, so this is a really good introduction to them, to be honest with you, I think, because it's just a really nice battle to showcase. It was a bit of lag before I got there, and I really do apologise for that, but there was nothing I could do. So hopefully you can forgive me, and hopefully we can show off a little bit more in the future, and hopefully going into the winter I will be a little bit more available to actually do some of the things that would announce these sorts of things with a little bit more fanfare, shall we say. But yeah, big thank you to Carmel and all of the players involved in this battle once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.